Lesson 23. Can Jesus forgive my sins? Now, I want to convince you that he can, that he does. For Christians, I'm not talking about non-Christians, but for Christians, this is the hardest thing for us to believe. Christians can believe in a 7-day creation, in the inspiration of scriptures, in a virgin birth, and the bodily resurrection of Jesus. But in my years of preaching, this is the hardest thing for me to convince Christians of, to believe that Jesus can actually forgive my sins. That's why this story in Mark is so important. It's about 4 friends, and they have a buddy of theirs that is paralytic. So every day they're either carrying him to a place to beg, or if he's from a wealthier home, we don't know. He would be carried from room to room or banquet to banquet. It's not the way they wanted their friend to live. And so they bring him to Jesus. Problem: they can't get him to Jesus because Jesus is in a home. Now, to clarify, the ancient world didn't have electricity or air conditioning, so most of their lives were lived out of doors. In the homes, the wealthier ones anyway, would have an outdoor courtyard surrounded by rooms. On one corner was a gate, and that's where you entered. Most of your life was not in a bedroom or in a storage room or in a kitchen. It was outside. Even cooking or weaving or teaching was outside. And so Jesus is outside in a courtyard surrounded by rooms. The only way to get to him is through that door. And it is packed. Nobody is moving. So they decide what we're going to do is climb up on the roof and then jump down. My guess is there was an awning, kind of a shaded area. So Jesus is still outside, but looking at the courtyard of people there he's preaching to. And they went up on the roof. How'd they get on the roof? I'm only guessing, but my guess is they went next door and got access to the indoor stairwell that led to the roof. Again, outdoor living spaces on the roofs were common. Put a plank across to the other house, precariously walked 4 guys with a man on a stretcher who I'm sure is going, be careful, be careful, be careful. They get to the house where Jesus is, jump down on the awning with a thud. And these awnings were built by thatch, so like sticks or smaller limbs with mud and grass laid across them. When they jumped down on that, it would have showered Jesus with dust and dirt and grass and leaves. And everybody sees these guys, so it's very distracting for the sermon. They're trying to listen to Jesus, but they're watching, like, what are those 4 guys doing? They literally dig through the awning and lower their paralytic friend right in front of Jesus. And the paralytic is probably just going, sorry to interrupt your sermon, but hey, I'm paralyzed. It's their fault. And Jesus looks up, and there's just these 4 heads looking down at him. And here's what it says in verse 5. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." It's a beautiful statement that caused a firestorm. As Jesus' popularity rises, his reputation gets to Jerusalem, and they send envoys to check him out. So these scribes, these teachers of the law from Jerusalem, make their way into the house, and they're kind of taking notes on Jesus, checking for his orthodoxy. And when he says your sins are forgiven, they protest. Listen, why does this man speak like that? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Now, obviously, if you sin against me personally, I can forgive you personally. But there's a legal debt. When you break the law of God, I can't forgive you for the law. I can forgive you for what you did to me, but I can't forgive your sins before the law of God. So, on the one hand, the Pharisees were right. No one can forgive sins but God alone. And that is precisely the question. If Jesus proves he can forgive sins, then he proves that he is God. Well, how would you do that? By saying, take up your bed and walk. When I was in middle school, I think I heard this at church or something, and it really confused me. Both are easy to say. In fact, both are 6 syllables. Take up your bed and walk. Your sins are forgiven. And I thought, they're both easy to say. Precisely. They're both easy to say and both impossible to do. Listen to how it's phrased in verse 12. And he rose, immediately picked up his bed, and went out before them all. So they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We never saw anything like this." Two things are happening. Number one, Jesus is proving that he is in fact God, because only God can heal a paralytic, and only God can forgive your sins. By waiting on the healing, he kind of baits them into saying, well, only God can forgive sins. How dare you say you can forgive? Okay, but only God can do this too, so I can do that, so therefore I am God and able to forgive your sins. I want to circle back to the question, can Jesus forgive my sins? He is God. He can. And if you doubt that you are fully and finally forgiven, what you're really doubting is not your goodness, but Jesus' goodness as God. It's not about how deep your sins go. It's about how deep his love goes for you. And you might think, well, I'm too bad. I'm too bad. You know the next story after this? Is Matthew, the tax collector, who nobody would have predicted would want to come to Jesus. The second thing that is happening in this scene is public approval. You see, in their world, honor was considered a limited resource. There's only so much to go around. So if Jesus is being honored by the public, and they're really the brokers of the honor, he is taking it away from the Pharisees. That's not going to bode well for his future. But it does make a strong statement that the public believed in Jesus' ability to forgive this man's sin. And that approval, that declaration should weigh heavy on your heart if you're feeling like, I don't know if God can forgive me. The bottom line of this story is, both with Matthew and with you, people far from church are not always far from faith. And if you have faith, even if you're far from church, you can be near to Jesus.